Hey folks, it's Fernando doing another video for the More Survivalists, and as I sometimes say, this is a video you should watch. Make the time. It's going to be a little bit of a longer video, but basically because of two reasons. This is a video in which I'm going to be trying to wrap up the basic concept of relocating to a country or a place you've never set foot on before in your life. Basically, when you don't have any other option, maybe you're even ending up almost in refugee category, and you find yourself in that situation, how you handle it, how you prepare to do such a thing as best as possible. You just never know. Maybe you may find yourself in that spot. Besides that, in this video, I'm also going to be making reference to something that's very important no matter what you do in terms of moving or not, relocating or not, about the mental aspects of preparedness, of being mentally and psychologically strong and capable of coping in general, on a daily basis. Being strong when you have to do something like I did when moving and leaving my country behind. But not only that, but being mentally strong for the challenges, maybe a little bit harder than what you're used to, giving the ongoing worldwide events. It's going to be, seems that it's going to be getting pretty tough for all of us in coming years. So this is something that it's going to be of relevance to all of us. Not only talking here about relocating and moving and bugging out anymore, but being mentally strong and capable of coping with what life throws at us. Okay, so let's get started. This is a video that I thought about doing basically because of a good email that I got from Ken. And he says, "Hi Ferfal, I have just finished reading your new book, which is Bugging Out and Relocating, my second book. Link, it's going to be somewhere there below to the Amazon store. It is easy to read, yet comprehensive enough for me to prepare for bugging out and plan for relocation if necessary." Well done. Well, thanks Ken, glad you liked it. I have also read your first book, which is the Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse. Link is also going to be somewhere there below if you want to check it out. And in the section on plans A, B, and C for relocation, you encourage the reader to first check out the country in person before moving over. Better still, live in that country for a while before deciding to include it in our relocation plan. I totally agree with your advice. One query immediately comes to mind when I read your second book, in which you admitted that you have never set foot on Ireland before moving over. Number one, the $1,000,000 question. Why? I'm sure you have a good reason, but I hope you can share with us. Well, basically, you end up moving like I did when you're running out of options, when you don't have any other option left. It's always better to check out the country that you're thinking of moving. All right, it's always better to spend some time there, go on holidays if you can. I mean, when you're not in a hurry, when you're not in a rush, and maybe you're planning on your next holidays, and maybe, you know, go check a place out, maybe a place that you have in the back of your mind as a potential place to go to if you ever have to leave wherever it is that you're living right now. That makes absolute sense. You get a better feel of it. I would say that you will, before deciding to stay somewhere for good, 6, 12 months, at least a year, I would say at least a year, so as to have a better grasp of what life is there in more of the intricate type of detail that it's that the experience of actually living there gives you. It may take even more time. It may be 5, 10 years later that you decide that you're not liking it anymore and you go back to where you came from. Happens. But at least I would give it a year, so as to say, yeah, I see myself here, I'm staying here, makes sense to me. But sometimes you don't have that option. Sometimes you don't have that much time. What happened in my case, I was just running out of time. I saw what was happening in Argentina. It was bad already. It has been bad since the economic crisis that I've written plenty and the videos about so much in December of 2001 when the economy collapsed. When Cristina Kirchner got re-elected, I saw even worse things heading our way. I realized that the economy was going to be becoming even more draconian in the way which was going to be handled, and said and done. Just days later, we saw these bans on purchasing foreign currency. People pretty much were left without an option of leaving. If you cannot sell your house and turn those assets to foreign currency, you cannot actually leave with your life savings from the country. You see what I'm getting? So it became very clear to me that we were reaching that point in which you were not out. This is something that I make reference to many times before. There's a couple of stages in a collapse. There's a stage in which the environment becomes hostile and you feel like you're being told to leave. Then it gets to a point where you're not allowed to leave anymore. That's when it gets pretty scary. So some things had happened. I also had a person from my shooting club that was murdered in about that same time. That was kind of like yet another wake-up call about how bad things were, crime getting even worse than it was already, and just seeing that we were basically running out of time. Either we left that moment or we just didn't leave. Our first option would have been the United States. It was the country that I wish I would have been able to go to, but it's a little bit more complicated given the immigration over there. So yeah, I know the jokes about, yeah, coming as an illegal, and yeah, well, I'm not an illegal, so that wouldn't have been an option for me. So basically I was running out of options. I had Europe basically as an option because of my Spanish citizenship, thanks to my grandfather, who was wise enough. He was my grandfather. He was a survivalist in his own right. He was a guy that had gone through a civil war in Spain, managed to make a living in spite of pretty harsh conditions, had the guts to leave when he saw that the future wasn't looking good in Spain anymore, left to a country that he himself had never set foot on before, after jumping into a boat that took like a month or a couple of months. I don't remember anymore how long it took. So yeah, it was a pretty epic kind of journey that you had to do back in the day. There was no internet, there was not much of TV to even watch what the place was like. So, but he learned the hard way in his own flesh and blood that being a citizen was something of key importance. So when the moment came, he made sure that I had citizenship myself as a Spanish citizenship. That was even before. Yeah, I think it was just a moment. It was the European Union or just about that. But he said, I remember that my parents weren't that, they weren't that crazy about getting that done. But my grandfather said, this is something that maybe someday in the future you may be happy to have it. It's something else. It's another citizenship that you have. You can have dual citizenship. Why not do it? You will, maybe one day this may make all the difference in the world. And he was absolutely 100% correct, as it sometimes happens with older folks that have more experience in life. So basically, trying to answer your question, yeah, whenever you can, spend some time in the country, do that. Absolutely, go on holidays. Even though I will say this, when you go on holidays to some place, you don't really understand that much how life is there. You're going on holidays. Your perspective is that of someone thinking of going to the beach, visiting museums, rather than dealing with the little day-to-day life things that residents end up going through and experiencing. So there is a little bit of a difference. Just going on holidays to a country or spending a few weeks there, even depending on the way in which you handle it, you can spend a few months. And if you're just partying, having a good time, not really looking at what people actually living there would be going through, experiencing and such, you may be leaving that place after a few months there without really having gained much knowledge at all. So it really depends. It's always better to see it yourself, but the research that you end up doing is in many ways more important than actually sitting there having a coffee in the nice touristy part of the city and not really knowing much of what life is like over there. it's pretty important to do lots and lots of research, which is what this second book of mine is about, is the research I did. And if you're asking the question about why, specifically why Ireland, well, basically you've read it in the book. I recommend a few countries. I recommend the United States, which is the one I would have gone to myself if I could have been able to pick any country. Canada is a great country that has lots of things, good things going for it. In Europe, I liked Ireland, even though there are other places as well. Spain was not bad, was not that much of a bad option, but it's more adequate for people maybe that don't have, maybe people that are not very conservative, especially if you don't have kids. I wouldn't have liked Spain that much for bringing up a family. I wouldn't have liked that much my kids growing up in Spain, the kind of education that they would be receiving over there, and what they would have grown up seeing around them. I'm a little bit more conservative in my views, and Spain wouldn't have suited me that well, even though it's a fantastic country when you look at it in terms of weather. Cost of living is very affordable, medical care is fantastic, so all very important key issues that make a pretty strong case for Spain, even though it's going through a pretty tough economic crisis as well. But again, it really depends on what you're looking for, and it depends on your personal circumstances, which again, something that I explained in the book. It's not the same thing, my case, with a couple of little kids, that maybe a couple with no kids, or a couple of older folks that have retired and are just, for older folks looking for good weather, cheap cost of living, and good medical care. If you have the residency for doing so, Spain is a no-brainer. It makes lots of sense, rather than being in Ireland, for example, right, where weather is not as nice, but you have other things that, at least for me, make a little bit of a better, stronger case. But it will depend. If you, for example, if you are under 30 years old, you don't have a wife, you don't have kids, you don't have any responsibilities of that kind in terms of family, you're young and you're looking of somewhere to go, Australia, New Zealand, those are countries that have holiday visas for work and holidays, so you can go there, spend a year working, having a good time, checking out the countries, gaining a little bit of experience, making money along the way. Makes a lot of sense. That would probably be what I would have done if I had been in that position. All right, travel a little bit more. Maybe go to some of these places where there's again, maybe in your case you don't even have a visa for doing what I did. Right? If you don't have citizenship, European citizenship, it makes a lot of sense to go spend a year in New Zealand, see if you can find a job there to stay there on a more permanent basis. That makes sense. Good country to be in as well. So it really depends on what you're looking for. And the idea of this book was also to just reduce the learning curve in terms of the research that you have to do so as to decide on each country. I think that with this book, if you read it thoroughly and you do a little bit more of your own research so as to gain a little bit more of the perspective of how you feel yourself about that country, not just looking at the charts, which are extremely important. Guys, in this book I include several charts in terms of crime, of cost of living, of social, of quality of life. All of those are extremely important, and the thing about these cold facts is that they're very objective, right? Many times people talk about, yeah, Ecuador is fantastic, Panama is fantastic because it's so cheap and so great. No, it's not. You just look at it and you see that it's a place awfully corrupt. The quality of life in many aspects just is not good. So when you look at it objectively, and when you look at the facts, you have a better idea. It's usually gonna be always the same old countries ranking best in terms of education, in terms of quality of life, in terms of healthcare. It's always the top 10, top 20 countries usually float around the usual suspects, and for good reasons. These these great secret countries that are that look like crap but are actually excellent, you always pay for what you get. And this has never been as true as it is when looking at a country to live in. You won't find a country that costs pennies to live in and has good quality of life. There's usually going to be something very bad about it. In general, I would go for the thing that lacks the most is one of the most important ones, which is transparency, lack of corruption, and lack of crime. It usually ranks very cheap countries in general rank very poorly in those regards. There are some countries that are quite affordable to live in, actually in many ways cheaper than these tropical paradises in Central and South America, that are cheaper to live in and still have a better quality of life. For example, Portugal would be one of those cases. Portugal is one of the cheapest countries in Western Europe to live in, yet it's much safer and the quality of life is much better than in Central America. Some of the Eastern European countries are also Slovenia, Czech Republic, even though you're kind of talking about a little bit of a different culture over there, but again, very affordable. If you're looking at that kind of a natural environment, lots of mountains, forests, and not that bad gun laws either, those two would be good choices as well. So going back to the question that I have here, the $1 million question is why. I'm sure you have a good reason, but I hope you can share it with us. That's basically why. I was running out of choices. I had decided that based on all the research that I had done, which I share with you in the book that you read, Bugging Out and Relocating, of the countries that I was looking at, United States, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, Uruguay even. Uruguay, I'm not really crazy about Uruguay, but as an option in South America, out of all those, having citizenship, European citizenship, it made a lot of sense, at least to me. I wanted either Spanish or English speaking country for obvious reasons. Those are the languages that I speak. Spain would have been, the thing is this, if I didn't like Ireland that much, I always had the option of going back to Spain. And that's where my folks are, and it could have been like a backup plan in case Ireland was really nothing like what I had in mind. So that was like my backup to the backup plan. But for England, I didn't like it that much. Scotland, I didn't like it that much because, at least to me, it seems a little bit more crowded, a little bit more messy in terms of how things are handled over there. More higher cost of living, more expensive, and you weren't getting really that much for what you were paying. In general, you would be having a better quality of life over here where I am rather than over there. But what happens is that people end up living mostly close to London because that's where they have jobs. That's where their work is. So that's usually why people end up in those places, in England and Scotland, because of work. So if that's not dragging you to those kind of places, you have other options. Here you have less population, you have less crime, you have a more tranquil lifestyle in general, which I at least like. So for all those reasons, I ended up here. Which are question number 2. Which areas do you think you could have done better if you had physically checked out the country first? Okay, that's an excellent question, an obvious one. Man, I can say that there's really, I cannot think of one. I cannot, completely 100% honest, again, the question, which areas do you think you could have done better if you had physically checked out the country first? None. I'm all humility aside, I'm very good at this. I'm very good at survival and preparedness. I love doing this, and you know what? Little advice of life in general: when you love what you do it well. I love this, and I'm very good at it. I'm not gonna be saying it any other way. In spite of all my flaws of character, of personality, and all my defects, like any other person, that every other person has, at least in this thing, this is my thing. I just enjoy. This is what I would do any other day. This is what I did before actually doing it. All right, this is something that I really enjoy doing. So I had done a ton of research so as to decide those countries, and there's really, I mean, it's no surprise. The United States, Canada, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Uruguay would be the only one that I would not go to myself unless I had to stick to South America. But other than that, those are all countries that have great quality of life in general. You have some of the Nordic countries, but I'm looking more at like English-speaking countries, because it's a book targeted for English-speaking people. So maybe if you are if you come from those places, Norway, Finland, that kind of thing, those are countries that generally rank very, very well. Switzerland as well, another country that usually does excellent in terms of quality of life. So it's not much of being very original with my selection, but knowing well what I was looking for, and one of the things that I explain in the book is, once you already narrow down, looking at crime, looking at cost of living in general, looking at general quality of life, and deciding for a honestly good place to live in, not going for these silly places like, I'm going to be going to Puerto Rico because of some ad that I read in a magazine. But you think about this carefully, you realize why you're going to these places. Then you do the careful, detailed research that I explain in the book, looking in reading the news, reading the local news for months at a time, every single day, looking at what people are talking about in that country. Once you narrow down the country, narrowing down the town that you're thinking of going to, reading local news of that town, of that country. If you find a local newspaper online, reading it every single day, checking it every single day for months at a time, you start seeing what people are worrying about. You start seeing the problems that people are mentioning from that place. Google Maps, it's the most powerful tool for doing this kind of research. You start looking at the street view, you start looking at the litter, if the streets are clean or not, if the houses have bars in the windows and alarms or not. If a neighborhood is full of bars and windows and such, it's a high crime place, so you probably want to avoid that sort of thing. By the way the houses are kept, the sidewalks, the streets, you realize that if there's money in that community, if people in the community have money so as to keep their houses well, if the town has money to keep the streets in good conditions, you kind of get a sense of the infrastructure, maybe even see a little bit of the people walking around, even with their faces blurred because Google has to do that in Google Maps. But you have a very good feel. I would even go, once I narrowed down the neighborhood I'd like to be in, I would go using the street view as if I was walking through the place, walking what it would be like to walk to the downtown part of the city. So I would do that, all that route with Google Street View. And once you're already there, you kind of already have that mental image of having seen that place. The more research you do like this, the more detail you get into all those little things, there's really no surprises. So going back to your question, which areas do you think you could have done better if you have physically checked out the country first? None. At least the way I did it, none. There was no surprise to me. Actually, the surprises were all pleasant surprises. What we often talk about with my wife is that we expected things to not work as well as we were planning. You know, we were expecting more failures in terms of planning. You know, that's kind of the mentality thing that we have. You plan for the best, but you always you plan as carefully as possible, but you always expect to make mistakes. At least in that regard, you know, the things that I didn't like, I already knew. Any place that you can think of, any place, absolutely every country, there's going to be things that you like, and there's going to be always something at least that you don't like that much. No place is perfect. The weather would be one of the things that I knew weather sucked. That was one of the obvious things. Weather is pretty cloudy. It eventually gets to you a little bit. And I explained that in the book as well. If you're the kind of person that kind of gets depressed easily, carefully consider the issue of weather, because the cloudy weather, the rain almost every couple of days and such, it eventually does get to you. Some people really depend on the nicer weather. So that's something that I knew already was one of the negative aspects. But you know, as time went by, maybe you start noticing a little bit more. The thing is this: as years start going by, you get used to the new things, and the things you like just become second nature to you. You just get used to them, and the things that you knew were going to be bothering you start bugging you a little bit more. And that always happens. It's I call this like the honeymoon period, especially the first year. No matter where you're going, even if you're moving to, you know, Thailand, and you really like the idea of living in that kind of culture, or you're moving to India and you really dig the Indian culture, you're gonna be loving it. And the things that are not so good about these places are gonna be bugging you after time starts passing by. And maybe in terms of culture, I knew it was a little bit divided and such. I expected it as well. I knew how things were. In general, you know what, for immigrants anywhere, it's not always easy. And this is something that happens pretty much everywhere. Some people are a little bit, you know, the xenophobia regarding immigrants is simply a sad reality, and it happens. You just have to have a thick skin about it. But yeah, I think that the weather is the mostly a thing that, and of course other things that I knew would be happening, and missing, you know, your culture. That's always something that you're gonna be. It wasn't much of a surprise. I didn't have to live here so as to realize that it would be happening. I knew. But yeah, as time goes by, you of course miss your culture. You of course miss your family. The biggest thing that kills you when you leave your country behind for good is your family. You know, the ones that are closest to you, the blood that you leave behind. But that's again unavoidable, and you're not going to be changing that by living somewhere for a few months. But we will go back a little bit to question number one. Whenever possible, live in that place. At least visit it for a couple of weeks and have but don't forget that the most important thing is not just visiting, but doing detailed research, as I describe in the book, detailed research about that country. That's the most important thing. And visiting is just going to be helping. It's not going to be visiting a place should not be the only thing in which you base the decision of moving there for good, relocating there. Trying to hurry up a little bit. How did you, question number three, the last one, how did you overcome the challenges in the above areas as a first-time visitor like yourself? Thanks for sharing your experiences and keep up the good work, Ken. Well, how did I overcome the challenges in the above areas as a first-time visitor like yourself? Being very well prepared by doing all this research that I'm explaining, and being pretty sure about what we were doing. We were very sure about leaving. We weren't like, oh, should we be leaving or not now? We were absolutely certain that staying was not an option anymore. As I say, like in the cover of the book, Bugging Out and Relocating, when staying is not an option. Staying was not an option anymore for us. We were absolutely certain, adamant about that. So that helps a lot. You're just burning the ships. You don't have a choice but to leave. If you're not so sure about it, then maybe you end up having more doubts. You end up second guessing yourself a little bit more. You start undermining and plotting against yourself without even noticing it. Being strong as a family. In my case, I left with a family. Maybe some other person leaves on his own. Leaving on your own has certain advantages and certain disadvantages. You're going to be feeling a little bit more lonely, or maybe a lot more lonely. At the same time, you don't have the responsibilities that I had. I don't know a lot of people, to be honest. Maybe if you guys know of someone else, leave a link, a comment below somewhere in the comment section. I don't know of a lot of people that did what I did. Picking up your family and leaving to a place you've never set foot on before. There's not a lot of people that actually do that. So what I explain in this book is actually something that I've done, and I know that not everyone does it. I know that it's you have to be brave and courageous and a little bit nuts, a little bit crazy maybe. But you know, crazy, what for some people is crazy, for people like me, it's being confident and sure about what you're doing. That was something that we were absolutely certain about. And if you look at it, we were almost like refugees. That's in terms of leaving with pretty much without actually moving, without taking much besides a couple suitcases each to a place you've never been to before. Yeah, sure, we were doing it in a plane. We were doing it in our terms. In you know, deciding many of these things, but man, it wasn't like relocating like you do with a company that moves you around because of work. You know, they rent a place for you, you fill up a shipping container with your stuff, and no, ours was, but it was a different case. But at least for us, you know, having little kids and such, we were experiencing it all like with lots of joy and happiness. It was a new start, a new fresh start for us, and we were enjoying it in spite of being very nervous and being a very scary thing if you look at it in terms of leaving everything behind and not being familiar, not having anyone there, not having family where you were going so as to help you out. My grandparents, when they left Spain, moving to Argentina, they had some distant families, relatives, so as to they would form communities, which helps a lot. You know, if there's a community to where you're going, that helps in terms of having people that speak your same language, that like the same food, cook the same food that you do. All those things do help. We had, you know, we were going like solo, like commando, like no one there. So, but being very strong as a family means that we had kids. I had the responsibility of a wife and two kids to look after, but at the same time, I wasn't alone. I had my family with me, that core unit that keeps you strong when you're feeling a little bit weaker. And you know, being mentally resilient as we are, as I am, as my wife is, and we pass that along to our kids as well. My kids are tough as nails, psychologically speaking. Look at it this way: we ended up moving to a completely new country, a second language for my son, yet a couple years later he was top of his class, and he's in the stage of leaving primary school, going to secondary school, and the teacher would tell me, you know, most of the kids here are crying their eyes out. They're stressed by the change of going to the little school to the big school, as she put it, and your son is like, you know, and as if nothing is happening. You know, he was completely. And she said, well, yeah, I see how he's such a tough boy. Well, he moved over from the other end of the world to a new country. Moving to a different school a few blocks away is not a big deal for him. And she's absolutely right. It's not. When you do these kind of things, when you learn to be resilient in all aspects of life, when you teach your kids and teach yourself not to complain about little things, about being strong, being mentally strong, and putting everything in perspective, and you learn not to whine so much about little things. You learn to be more accepting of the things you really cannot change, and take care of those that you can actually do something about, and just roll with what life ends up throwing your way. So basically that's it. I thought it was an interesting email, a few interesting questions that was a good food for thought, for conversation, and any comments, ideas you have, just let me know. The book, again, is Bugging Out and Relocating. It's going to be the link below, and my first one, the Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse, again, link there. The first one is more about bugging in, about living in that kind of, that would be one of the best ways of putting it. The Modern Survival Manual is like the manual for an economic collapse, urban survival. The second book is not only my personal story, but also what you end up doing when everything is lost in that place and you have to leave. So the first one is more about bugging in, getting by as best as you can. The second one is about leaving when you don't have much of a choice. Folks, subscribe to the channel if you're liking what you're watching. Share the videos with others. Like it as well. The button somewhere there is always appreciated. Take care. Have a great day. Enjoy your weekend. See you on our next video.